Sage Wanderer here, coming at you from my van down by the river. And this is the story of how I became a Catholic priest. Now, those of you who are fans of this channel may have pieced together some of the elements of my strange life, how I was a musician, then a preacher, then a musician, then a preacher. I guess it's one of my flaws in life. I can't decide whether I want to be a musician or a preacher. But how did I become a Catholic priest? A lot of you have not heard me say that. Some of you who are very astute and listen have heard it and made comments about it. And I've talked about it briefly. But this is the story of how a charismatic Pentecostal preacher becomes also a Catholic priest. So if you know my timeline, you know that in my first church, I shut my first church down, got rid of all of my accoutrements, even put the sound system in chairs in storage, and went back to ground zero when I encountered a witch who was demon-possessed that I felt powerless to do anything to combat them. I felt like I had no effect on them, that they were completely immune to anything that I had to say, do, or otherwise. And I felt like that was not how a preacher, a charismatic preacher, should have more power, more authority. And I realized that I had been undertrained. And so I decided to quit until further notice. And God told me to go into a storefront church. And it used to be in an old J.C. Penney's. And I went into this storefront church and met someone that would later on go on to be a good friend of mine, and her husband would end up being my best friend. And their son would almost be like a second son to me. And but at any rate, I joined this church that was clearly on the surface very charismatic. I had little experience with charismatic churches since I had been mostly a Pentecostal kid who was drawn towards churches who were trying to be more charismatic. So Pentecostal churches with the new wave worship and less focus on the holiness concept and how you dress and what you say. And, you know, it's like Pentecostals who don't mind that their wives wear makeup and they go to the movies and they might want to go to a Garth Brooks concert or something, you know, without condemnation. So, and there's a lot more to the history of the charismatic movement, but I found myself in a charismatic church that was an offshoot of a major denomination. One that I had not had a lot of experience with, but was aware of. But one of the things that, after attending there, I immediately realized is it's what they call a deliverance church. So it was all about devil fighting and exorcism and deliverance. And they had a patriarch, a guy that was over the whole organization. I realized that this church was one of the biggest churches in a much bigger organization. And that even though the church was in a J.C. Penney's, it took the whole J.C. Penney's up. I mean, it was a big church. And so at any rate, yeah, I got involved there. They offered me a job. I got involved in the music. I was the band director. I was the youth pastor. I built that into a regional youth group that was over several churches in the area. I brought in some new youth groups that were and affiliated them and began to build structures in the community, and it got bigger and larger, and there was a big youth camp, and pretty soon they put me over 3 states, and I had a tri-state youth camp that I ran every year. And so I was busy doing this, building the kingdom of God, while at the same time, the church I was involved with at the highest level was going through some continuous theological changes that were leading us more and more towards Catholicism. The pastor, the bishop, the 2 head guys, the patriarch and the bishop of this organization, both believed that for the Lord to come back, the church would have to be reunified. And they were very much about what they call convergence. And that's where we don't necessarily agree doctrinally, but we all agree to be in community with one another, to be in fellowship with one another, ecumenicalism to a certain degree. And this was very important to them, and for them to be the leaders in this, they needed to encompass all forms of Christianity in their one form of Christianity. And they had become very diverse. In evangelical thought, there was a little bit of this eternal security was sprinkled in there, you know, liberal grace, but also confession, also, deliverance. There was, godly living was taught, but not necessarily emphasized. It was more about having control over one's life and being a person of moderation rather than a person of total abstinence, per se. Anyway. But they began to get more and more focus on the Catholic in their ideology. And I guess the bishop worked with me one-on-one for a number of years, slowly indoctrinating me into some Catholic ideas, until I had, unbeknownst to me, I had on some level accepted the basic tenets of Catholicism enough to just barely be considered a legitimate Catholic. And then the last thing was the veneration of the saints. I had a problem with praying to saints. I thought it was necromancy, and but then he helped me see that that this has been going on since the beginning, and it's not talking to the dead, because the dead in Christ aren't dead. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, and that all you're doing is getting the attention of this heavenly brother, this person who has come before you in the faith, and you were getting them to pray for you to God, because they were closer to God. They're closer to Christ. He's right there. You're way down here. Maybe you can get their attention if you can't get his attention. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I don't see any harm in that. And I kind of accepted that. I said, I'll probably never pray to a saint. I study them because I find they're interesting people from the past, but I'm not going to pray to them at all. I won't venerate them, but I also won't condemn someone else who does. And I don't necessarily have a problem with it. How they spend their prayer time is up to them, and I'm not that. I'm really more simple than that. I'm just a simple pastor. And when I said that, it was the last piece of the puzzle for this bishop. And about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call on a Saturday afternoon. Now, I was all set to go fishing with my kids. It was my one day off. I didn't have any youth stuff going on. It was a 6-day-a-week job, and Saturday oftentimes. Really, it was a 7-day-a-week job, and sometimes I got a Saturday or a Monday off. And so it was Saturday. I had planned to be with my children. They were off from, it was summertime, so there was no school, but we were able to do things together on the weekends because their mom, who worked full-time, was off on Saturdays. So it was family day. And I get the call from the bishop that says, meet me in the mall parking lot in Fort Worth in 3 hours, and wear your Catholic cross, because they slowly been equipping us, and we, for formal things, we started wearing a collar. Really, they were doing that when I joined them. They were using the collar. I didn't have a problem with that. In formal settings like weddings, funerals, special ordinations, things like that, holy days, and I didn't mind. They kept the church calendar, which I was not unaccustomed to a certain degree. I was at least well versed in the church calendar and followed it kind of already anyway. And so they, I was a well-educated guy, and this was just, I thought, more education, But he told me to meet him at this parking lot. No information why. It was the middle of summer. It was my day off. I wasn't real happy about it, but I dressed the way he told me to, suit with the collared shirt and the Catholic cross, not the charismatic Catholic cross that you see that I wear from the Avery Brothers, great company. That you might have seen me wear in the past, but a St. Benedict's medal cross from more from Catholicism. So at any rate, I show up, and I'm really blown away that they're all there. That the top 6 men in the organization, I'm talking in the global organization, are there in the parking lot, and they're all dressed just like I'm told to be dressed. And I'm thinking, what is going on? What is happening here? And all I thought is, well, maybe somebody died. We're going to a funeral. What's with the cloak and dagger? Why no information? And I asked around to some of the other guys that are maybe at my level or just a little higher than me. Hey, do you know what's going on? And like, well, I don't know what's going on. And then when I asked the upper level guys, they knew what was going on, but they still weren't going to tell me. And we waited for everyone to get there. And when the last person was there, the 7th man, I was 5th to show up there, but I was the 7th man in ranking. I was the lowest man in ranking in the leadership at that time. And so these were the 7 bigwigs. I was one of them, I guess. And so I don't know what's going on. And I'm a little nervous. Fort Worth isn't always the best neighborhoods there. And they all fit into one SUV, all 6 of them, but really because one of the other guys is kind of big, he's kind of rotund, and I didn't want to sit on his lap necessarily. And I was a little nervous about what's going on, didn't know where I was going, so I reluctantly said, hey, why don't I just follow you in my car? I'll just follow you, is that okay? So I follow them as we go deep into the Mexican barrio, deep into areas where it's predominantly all non-English speaking Hispanic people. And we park right in front of, they park their SUV right in front of what can only be described as a gang house. I mean, the guys are wearing colors. There's a gun leaned up against the porch rail. You know, they're all hanging out on the front porch, you know, Mexican gangster guys. I mean, I don't know anything about Mexican gangs, but it just, that's what, yeah. Nervous. Made me nervous. I'm glad I took my own car since, you know, there was a gun in my car. I knew that for sure. And so we park in this neighborhood, and we meet a young Hispanic man who is dressed in black slacks and a white shirt and black dress shoes. And he introduces himself. I forgot his name. And he says, you know, welcome, you know, follow me. The Archbishop is waiting. And that's when I first realized that this was, okay, we are meeting an archbishop. I still don't know what's going on. We're meeting an archbishop. That's all I know. Okay, that's cool. I've never met an archbishop before. I mean, well, we had a patriarch, but we didn't have an archbishop. So I never met an archbishop. So I'm like, okay. So we follow this guy. And I asked him, I said, hey, is my car safe here? And he says to me, he says, oh, no, you're under the protection of the archbishop now. No one will touch your car. And I kind of look over at the gang members, and they wave. Like, hey. So apparently, in this neighborhood, even the gang members are under the, or at least have respect for the Catholic bishops and archbishops there. So we followed this individual, and it was the weirdest thing because it was in this, all the houses were from the Victorian era and up to 1930s. A lot of clapboard houses, 2 stories. You know the thing, the old neighborhoods, and they're dilapidated and run down, and you know there's roosters chained in the front yard with a chain around their string around their ankle tied to a stake in all the houses, and just like, yeah, we are the only non-Hispanic people there in that whole area. And we're going through I don't know why they brought us the back way to this church. It was all very secret. And we went the back way through yards, and I remember going past a pit bull and like being a little scared, and the guy going, it's okay, his chain won't reach over here, as we walked along this pathway through backyards until we ended up at the back door of a Catholic diocese church. Catholic church. Now at that moment I was no more Catholic than the man in the moon. But I didn't realize that I actually had been converted to Catholicism in some way, and had not even really realized it, but just accepted it as some sound Christian teaching. And so when we come to the back of the church, behind the church is the only other non-Hispanic guy around. And he's dressed in these big white robes with the vestments around his neck and the giant pectoral cross, and he's got the archbishop's hat, but it's laying over here, right? And he just looks like any old redneck Texan, and he's smoking a cigarette. We walk up behind this guy, he's smoking a cigarette, and he snuffs the cigarette out, grabs his hat, puts his hat on, walks over, goes, hey, I'm Joe, and he introduces himself, and apparently this is the patriarch, the archbishop and patriarch of the Mexican National Catholic Church in Texas, which is a Mexican National Catholic Church out of Guanajuato, Mexico. And the Mexican National Catholic Church is one of the many offshoot National Catholic churches, or part of the old Catholic movement. Their story goes all the way back to the Mexican Revolution, how they sided with the original priests when the priests were being replaced by the new government with priests that were more in line with the government. So they were like fake priests and bishops that were put in place in Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, and the church became fake to them, and they and all the people ran to the mountains and stayed Catholic. But the Pope sided with the government and said that the new pastors were to be the new pastors, and they rebelled against the Pope and remained Catholic next to and beside the actual Roman Catholic Church that recognized the state church, and they became known as the Mexican National Catholic Church, part of the old Catholic movement. Google it. And At that point, they all go into the church, and I grab my bishop, my friend, my mentor, and I'm like, what is going on? You have to tell me now. He goes, okay, it's just going to be a minute, because the Mexican National Catholic Patriarch is going, hey, is it going to be 6 or 7? Are there 6 of you or 7 of you? And I'm going, what is going on? And he pulls me aside and he goes, okay, you're 7, so is it 6 or is it 7? And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, look, we're secretly ordaining all of the leadership into the Mexican National Catholic Church so that we can get apostolic succession through the Roman Catholic Church all the way back to Peter. It's going to give us more spiritual power. This is part of what we've been talking about. This is part of the of this movement, this convergence church interdenominational movement. Do you want to get ordained into the Catholic Church or not? And I'm like, wow, thanks for giving a guy time to think and pray about it. He goes, look, it's now or never. You're in or out. And I'm like, will they have me? I'm married. He goes, you're getting a special dispensation. We all are. They don't care about that. They're just looking to increase the priesthood and expand their operation. And this is one way they're doing it. And it's not any. And I already knew this. He'd already primed me. I already knew all of this about that Catholics were bringing in whole Christian, evangelical Protestant Christian churches in and letting the pastors be priests and keep their wives and not have to get divorced or anything. It's called a special dispensation. They're doing it because they can't get anybody to sign on to the priesthood anymore. And but at any rate, I was like, okay, I'm in. I trust you. I just took his hand. I go, look, I trust you. Don't lead me astray. You're my shepherd. I trust you. You're the guy that's supposed to be leading me, and I'm doing this because I trust you. And so we went in and we all knelt down and we went through the Catholic ordination process. And all of us, even the old man from the Assemblies of God, who was a man that I know for a fact because I've seen the videotape, who was on the platform behind Jimmy Swaggart when Jimmy Swaggart confessed his sin on national television, because the man who was one of my mentors, who was there also getting ordained in Catholicism that day, had been the man who told Jimmy Swaggart, look, buddy, confess your sin, come clean before the people, go into a time of repentance, or we're seizing everything you own and taking your church and putting you out on the street. He was a tough old man. So that's how I got ordained into the Roman Catholic Church via the Mexican National Catholic Church. And another weird link in my very strange life.